Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 159 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. As always, I am one of your hosts, Emerson, and joining me, we have my co host, Anomaly.
Hello.
And this week, we're talking about more raid stuff, more key stuff. There was an interview, I think, that we're gonna,
Singular.
yeah, we're gonna talk about that. But along with all of that, the race to world first also began and ended since
Yes.
the last podcast. So we're gonna talk about that and maybe a little bit about the overall tuning of the raid and the speed of gearing and what that maybe means for the future.
Yes.
But you want to get started with do we want to start with the race to world first progression or do we want to start with our
We can
progression?
start that. Let's start with the race forward first, and then we can sort of dovetail into our progression. Because I think it's probably similar. Well, not as quick, but similar like yeah, similar in the way it will progress too, I think. So
Yeah.
yeah, so race forward first, start and ended.
Actually, I'm wrong. It didn't start this
What?
week, did it? It started last week. It ended after our podcast last week. Because I remember
Yes, you're
talking
right.
about
Yeah.
Nightmare X last week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So it ended after. You're right. It ended after we did the podcast. But yeah, on Monday, right?
Yep.
Uh, limits or sorry, liquid, killed Sarkareth first. Interestingly enough, liquid liquid got on early. They did this thing which I think is I don't know if it's tilting or not. I don't think Echo's sort of had an interview yet to talk about this, but when Liquid went to bed Sunday, they turned off logs. Basically, they turned off
They
or
turned
turned
off
on
logs and they turned off streams.
yeah. So they didn't stream for about 4 or 5 hours, probably worth of progression Sunday night. And then also turned off logs, so you couldn't see how they were progressing. And then randomly, at I think it was 8 a.m. Eastern or 9 a.m. Eastern on Monday, which would have been 6 a.m. on the West Coast, which is where they're at. Streams come on and logs come on, and you see that they have gotten Saccharus to 14%.
Yeah.
I think is what it came up with.
Yeah.
Um, where and at that point, Echo was still in like the 40s or upper 30s, right, in
Yep.
terms of their progression. So a little jarring, we'll say. They were on early, and then they also did this, which I mean, from a general race perspective, like coming on early and messing with your sleep schedule basically means you kill it there. Like it's a killable boss, right? The
Yeah.
idea is, I think they thought that they needed to get up early, needed to start early because it was like one of the two guilds was going to kill that boss that day. And
Yeah.
it happened.
Yep.
And yeah, Liquid made sort of steady progress the rest of the day. So a couple really good pulls, and then ended up killing the boss first. Probably like afternoonish time, sorry, I believe. Uh, for the US. So yeah, they got it there. So they went world first, and then Echo killed it. Later that day, like later that evening, EU time, really. Um,
Yeah.
so both got a
So
first reset.
the gap between the two was about 6 hours.
Hmm.
Echo killed it at 1:50 Eastern time, Eastern U.S. time, and or sorry, Liquid killed it at 1:50 Eastern U.S. time, while Echo got it at about 7:30 Eastern U.S. time. So it's around 6 hours, 5.5 hours gap between the two, and so very like the sleep thing,
Close.
the getting up early thing, um, played a role
Mattered.
probably. Like that got them like if they had started at their usual like well 4 hours later, it would have
Yeah.
been a much closer race. There would have been even if they had both taken the exact same amount of time from there, like it would have been
Yeah.
like an hour and a half, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It would have been super close. So yeah, no, yeah, it was a really close race between the two. And it came down to the wire. I think, at least from my opinion, I think over the course of, and I think this is true when Liquid last won, is that Liquid just seemed to play better on every boss. Like whether that was a strat thing or like an execution thing, they seemed to just be better. And there was no flip flopping of boss kills, which I think helped them. Right.
Yeah.
It's not like Echo would get one world first, and then Liquid come back and get the next boss. Liquid got essentially every world first past Rashok, I think,
Yeah.
or Zakarn. I think one of the two. I forget which one they got the first one, but they got every world first from there, which is how they've won the three times they've gotten world first. Is I don't think they've ever fallen behind Echo in any of those races. So
If you
um
if you look at the amount of time that they spent on these bosses, It's interesting that so this is a better spread than we saw in Vault of the Incarnates, where they're just like even for World First Guilds, Razageth was just like by far the dominant time sink. Not
Yeah.
even like this is so roughly Echo or sorry Liquid spent about 8 hours progressing Mythic Razageth in actual combat time. That doesn't include time between pulls, discussing strat, or sleeping time, or any of that.
Hmm.
That's just time in combat. Uh, but they overall spent about 18 hours, so it was under half of the total time that they spent in combat on these bosses. Echo of Notharian was the next highest at around 5 hours,
Hmm.
4 to 5 hours. And then Skarn, actually, I think surprising very few people, clocking in at around 4 hours. And so, like, those two bosses, like, this is, like, pretty different from last year where Razageth was just, like, 60 or something,
Like, yeah.
60 to 70% of all time that they spent in the raid during that race.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure like most guilds killed every boss pre Razageth in like less than 100 pulls, and then Razageth was 3 or 400 pulls.
Yeah.
Like, which is just, yeah, crazy from a difficulty perspective. So, yeah, the difficulty curve, a lot will say like cleaner. I think in general, most people say like difficulty curve went well or was good tuning wise, except for Magmarax. I think
Yeah.
Magmarax is the outlier in just it was too easy for where it was. But like Rashok, Zakarn, Echo, and Sakareth, all very, very neatly tuned and didn't seem, at least from like watching, I watched a bunch of the liquid stuff, didn't seem very many like crazy bugs that they were
Yeah.
dealing with.
I think the fights were not as buggy, that's for sure, and there weren't nearly as many tuning misses. Where like if you look at Vault of the Incarnates, there were
Hmm.
major tuning changes during the race to World First on at least three bosses,
Yeah.
and on
Yeah.
Razageth there were at least three just on Razageth. Like on so it was like Thea, they added an extra ad so that the Hardened Rage was not as deep into the fight,
Yeah.
or so that you could take the fight longer without hitting that soft enrage. They reduced the damage on Kurog. They then on Razageth nerfed the ads, nerfed the Storm Surge, and then nerfed the Phase 3 soft enrage.
Yeah.
Just
All
like,
before.
and all three of those walled both guilds.
Yeah.
Um, so that's yeah. In contrast, this time the only real bug that I noticed watching the race was invisible moats falling on Sarkareth. And this, I think, is just another issue in the long line of sometimes two puddles overlap and you can't see the second one more than anything else. Like you have
Yeah.
the black hole like group soak,
Hmm.
and you go to soak it, and you get bombed by a moat that's falling that you can't see, and then
Yeah.
you get sent downstairs and don't soak and people die.
Yeah. I thought too, it might also be, I didn't know if this was also happening, but I know that like in Jaina, this was an issue with the bombardments where like if you came out like the way that
Oh
the
yeah,
projected textures work, sometimes if you come out of like a down phase back up, you don't see what's already been spawned. So like if a moat already
yeah,
spawned and is falling, it doesn't project the texture for you.
yeah,
And they could also get hit by something like that. So yeah, I know that was a Jaina issue. There was another boss fight more recently than that that I think this came up on, but I thought I also heard that too, and I thought maybe it was something similar where it's
yeah.
just like
That also
doesn't.
seems likely as a problem.
Yeah, it's more of an engine issue than anything. But no,
Um,
yeah, I mean, Liquid got it down, Echo right behind them. There didn't. It was funny. There wasn't any sort of. I guess the other thing about this is there wasn't any sort of crazy class stacking. Like I
yep.
think most guilds pretty killed. I think pretty much killed it with like maybe Paladin ends up being like the stacked class. I know that
Yeah.
Limit or Liquid ran a Ret, a Holy, and a Prot, so one of each spec. But yeah, no, there wasn't any sort of like super overpowered class. That everybody was running a bunch of. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, it was a quick race, we'll say.
Yeah, so that's the other thing about this, right? People have been commenting a lot about the relationship between this race and I think the actual fastest race ever, which was Emerald Nightmare, which
Yeah.
ended before EU even had a reset, I believe. Um,
Yeah, well, it ended in a I feel like that one was like a couple like it
or
was a
maybe it was
couple
like a second
days.
day. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was like I think Exorcist got world first on Xavius, and I think
Okay,
the
so it would
only
have been
reason they
EU.
beat
Yeah.
yeah, I think the only reason they beat Method was because Method went to bed like slightly earlier that tier because they're like, oh, we'll have a bunch of time to progress on Xavius, and
And
then
then Exorcist just
Exorcist
killed
stayed
it.
up. Yeah,
Yeah.
just killed it. Yeah, like 'cause I think that one lasted literally till like Thursday of that week. So
Okay,
like I don't
yeah.
even think it lasted to the weekend. So
So an
it,
interesting thing about that. So if that's Thursday, that's like the Wednesday to Thursday. So that's like 2 days, right?
yeah.
Um, we don't know much about how they did splits at the time. This was pre-streaming, right?
Hmm.
Pre-streaming, pre like production and all the other stuff that goes into the current Race to World First setups.
Hmm.
Um, and that means we don't know, for example, how much, if any, time they spent on splits. Um, have to assume that there's some, but I don't know how much. Versus this race, like they didn't even like when's Liquid's first mythic kill?
Should have been
Liquid,
Friday
yeah, it's
or
it's
maybe late on Thursday.
it's May 11th, at 11:50 p.m. my time, which would have been Thursday night. They killed Kazara, then they went and killed Amalgamation Chamber, then Forgotten Experiments, then Assault of the Zakali, and then Rashok. I guess they went to bed after Assault of the Zakali, and then did Rashok the next day. But like,
Yeah,
they didn't even touch it until after World First Xavius happened, relative to reset time,
yeah,
by over a
yeah.
day.
Yeah, I heard a stat. I don't know how true this is, but I heard a stat that Liquid killed heroic Sarkareth 32 times
Yeah,
in their
I
splits.
heard
I think
something
actually
similar.
I might have mentioned that last week too. But yeah, no, they did a ton of splits to start it, and yeah, no, it's I mean I think that's just the race, like Max was saying, and I think Scripe also had a similar comment of like as long as they do dual release, like I think it's two things, as long as tier sets are a thing, and as long as they release everything together like this, like they will always do splits like first, right? So the
Yeah.
first like 3 or 4 days of any race will be splits. Um, but yeah, this is I mean I think in general it was a quick one, which I don't. I mean, look, like from my point of view, these are the best players in the world with the most amount of time and
Right.
resources. Like they don't want like for me, like I equate it to like most normal people who play WoW, and maybe I'm a little bit like we're a little bit more involved in it, but even for us, like we do a bunch of prep work based on what other people do, but then when we get into a fight, there's always changes, right? There's
Right.
always like adjustments and things like that where um and then like people are seeing, I mean, to be fair, some of our raiders are seeing mechanics for the first time because they don't do any prep themselves. Right. And so like in a guild like Liquid or Echo, like they've done these fights as a group on PTR, right? They've
Yeah.
spent time like mapping things out. They've had like
Yeah.
sessions where they sit down and map everything out. Like cooldowns are all like basically hit exact like sort of all pre-planned,
Yep.
and adjusted based on like specific timings or like we're sort of throwing it together a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's one of those things where like people get so hung up, like, and it's I don't even think it's like the world first people. I think it's just in general, like the community gets hung up on the
Yeah.
fact of like didn't make it to the first reset, super easy raid. It's like, well, like number
Yeah.
one, are you clearing it in the first week? Probably not. And like, are you clearing it in less pulls than like Liquid and Echo did it at probably lower item level?
So here's an
If you don't
interesting
either.
stat. Okay, so I've been doing a bunch of prep for Rashok because we're going to be pulling Rashok hopefully tonight. We have
Hmm.
forgotten experiments to get to, not to get like too much into our own prog and everything.
Yeah.
Um, Liquid killed Rashok at eye level 432.5. Right, that's pretty
Hmm.
good. That's solid 8 eye levels over what you could have reasonably obtained last tier.
Hmm.
Like I think the highest eye level people in the world were like 423, 424, with like maxed out gear from the last two bosses and from the Mythic Plus vault and all this stuff. Um,
Right.
so that's really geared. They killed it with 7 or 8 seconds left before the enrage, which may sound pretty close. If you look at recent progression kills on this boss, people like guilds like mine are at 435, 436, 437. So we're 4, 5, 6 eye levels higher.
Hmm.
And killing it at the enrage at 6 minutes 30 seconds, where Liquid killed it at around 622, 623. And that's a lot. Like they, with less gear, killed it faster. Like
Yeah.
literally the time on in combat with the boss on their kill pool is less with less gear. And that's like there's a big gap between what these world first guilds can do, not just in terms of strat prep, which I think mechanical and strat prep stuff is um gonna be a huge factor in how long guilds take on Sarkareth, just based
Hmm.
on the kinds of things that they were doing in the world first race and some of the commentary after the race. There's a lot of pretty tight mechanical checks and people having to make kind of snap decisions,
Yeah.
which, uh, you know, hit or miss.
Yeah.
But Rashok is really like, aside from Magmarax, is one of the closest patchwork bosses. There's not really, there's some strat prep, but it's not super complicated. It really is just a numbers check.
Yeah.
And so like this is like the world first guilds exceed where kind of more normal guilds are, both in terms of planning and prep, like you were talking
Hmm.
about, but also just pure execution of the basics of the like the fundamentals of the classes they're playing, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
it's not just like they have a better strat, they have better prep, they execute their strat better, more reliably, and
Yeah.
also they execute their classes better and more reliably while doing it. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Like you add all those things together, and there's a huge gap between what a world first guild is capable of doing, how quickly they're capable of killing a boss versus, you know,
Yeah.
my guild. And that's not a knock on my guild. That's just the reality of, Liquid and Echo recruiting literally the best players in the world and investing hundreds, if not thousands of hours into prep before the race
Yep.
versus ours where like I have spent probably 100 hours total, maybe not even that, on raid prep, and that's including stuff like PTR testing that I did prep
Yeah.
for.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. It's there's a huge gap there, but I think I think for me, like watching this race, like I don't. I said this the other day too, to someone. I was like, I'm not dreading progressing any of the bosses we have remaining, right? Like
Yeah,
where there was definitely the dread of like in
Dathia.
Sepulcher, it was like I mean, it was Dathia in Vault, or even like I mean to be completely honest with you, like Diurna was always gonna be one, or not Diurna, but Kurog, sorry, was one where I was like, this is just gonna be rough. And like I'm
Yeah,
not looking forward to doing this and stuff like that. So I mean, no, I'm happy. Like for me, it was a fun race. It was good. Like there wasn't a bunch of like issues, right? I think it was cool that Liquid, pulled the whole like we're not gonna stream tonight and the huge backlash from a lot of people. I'm just like, dude, like they want to win, like let them do that,
yeah. I
Like
I
I don't
know
I
that was a little bit
sorry.
frustrating. So that was a little bit frustrating from my side. Not for the same reason that it is for a lot of people, but like for work reasons. So again, I work at Warcraft Logs. We have a Race to World First page. When Liquid turned off competition mode, they disappear from the leaderboard. And that's like they have the power to do that, right? The
Yeah.
way our rankings and our Race to World First stuff works, you can turn off competition mode and log privately, and it doesn't show up anywhere. And if you want to have your privacy, you can have your privacy, and that's a built-in feature, right? Um, but also it meant that they disappeared from the leaderboard for like 8 hours.
Right. I noticed that there was a little custom message for their progression, which was labeled, I think, like hiding strats, where you typically have like number of pulls and what
Yeah,
percentage they're at. Yeah. Yeah. That is definitely annoying. You have to put in some custom code to like I guess you manually basically insert them on that list.
yeah.
So
I was actually out when that happened because of stuff last weekend. But yeah,
yeah.
it was
Nice.
a little bit of a
Nice.
headache.
Awesome. Well, cool. I mean, yeah, I guess that's on the race. I mean, the only other, I guess, maybe final topic, which I don't really want to get too much into, but there was a little drama, as there always is, with the fact that EU gets the race later. They killed it within quote unquote the 11-hour head start that NA gets. So technically, in terms of time commitment, like or time invested, we'll say, or I guess time from maybe reset is the best way to describe this. They killed it faster potentially than Liquid did, Echo did. But yeah, I mean, to me, I think at that point, it's whoever kills it first, right? Like, if it's not a Xavius type situation where it's like a
Yeah,
couple of days, right? If you make it to the weekend, at least my personal opinion, if a boss makes it to the weekend after release, like it's fair game. Like whoever kills it first at that point, you guys have both teams have put enough time in, have probably jumped each other back and forth that they
Yeah.
it's whoever kills it first. The head start means a little very little by that point. So
Yeah.
um
It's I don't there's another great solution because of like we talked about last week because of the amount of time that these take. You do a global release, you still run into things like sleep schedules.
right.
This isn't like WoW Classic where if you do a release and it happens to be at 10 o'clock in the EU and 7 o'clock in the US, both regions can still do it because the race is over in an hour.
Right, yeah.
If you do that kind of release with retail, um, EU guilds still only get like 3 hours of raid and then they need to go to bed so they can be functional the next day. Whereas
Right.
NA still is getting, 6, 8 hours of raid time before they have to go to bed. So there's really like it would be closer to equitable, but it would still kind of suck.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing, like the Raceful World First is like one, and I think it's big to a lot of people who care about rating, but it's like one small component of like WoW in general, right? Like
Right.
there's a bunch of other stuff that sort of sit on that release schedule, and it's like changing everything. Like I guess the way that it, like in my mind, it's confusing if they do it either way. Like the first way is like they just do global releases for patches, for major, I guess maybe raid patches, right? Which means like 1 or 2 weeks out of every couple months is just going to be off for everybody.
Yeah.
And whether that's off for NA or off for EU or even off for, like, to be fair, like Asia would also want to be included in this, right? Like that's the
Right.
other side of it. And so like you mess with release schedules for everyone where people might have a set schedule of like, okay, like we raid Tuesday nights, but because this week is raid release, we have to raid Wednesday and Thursday because the raid comes out too late for us, right? If they
Yeah.
moved it in an NA perspective, right? Or vice versa for you. So like I don't like that aspect of it because it changes it for just a couple weeks all around, like basically like 40 or 50 people, right? The two guilds, right?
Yeah.
Is sort of all that it affects. And the other side of it too is they do this overall move to like the other side of it is an okay, well, just do a global release of everything, meaning like maintenance windows and everything are the same time for everybody for every region.
Yeah.
And in that case, even worse because like now someone's getting screwed. Like in the US, it's Tuesday mornings for us, but that's Tuesday afternoons in the EU. If they do it even earlier, it's too early in like the Pacific time zone. So they could do it technically like
Yeah.
super early, like 2, 3 a.m.
Basically,
EU.
time zones suck and global releases are really hard.
Yeah, it's just there's not a good solution. So I think they just leave it as is and just go forward. Because I mean, it's to be fair, Race World First is such a community driven event that like I think asking Blizzard to do anything or set up anything just changes the way the race is too much.
I could see so the thing that makes sense to me, the only real change that makes sense to me is saying Race to World First happens on the tournament realm. Like that gets rid of splits. It gets rid of this like question of how gear acquisition works. It does mean that people like both guilds basically go in with like this gear from the vendors, right?
Yeah,
Um, but it on the one hand, that's nicer because there's then you don't have to deal with splits. You don't have first 3 days of the race being splits.
yeah,
On the other hand, you miss out on things like the stories from the Vault of the Incarnates race where they had their I don't remember which boomkin it was. One of their boomkin was farming no good offensive for Rage Feather. Um
yeah.
and so there was the moment where the Rage Feather dropped for somebody that was in the key and they were trying to like get him to sell them the Rage Feather and negotiating with him. And it seemed like negotiations were going bad, and it ended up being that they like gave him a shout out on stream on the Race the World First broadcast, and then he just gave them Rage Feather. And so
That's awesome.
there was that that's like a cool story, and there's community interaction. It's neat, and that would not happen if it were on the tournament realm.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's stories like that. We had a paladin who we gave a BOE for that dropped with a double socket. This
Mm,
is when this was it was the last expansion, but it was a ring, I think, that dropped with a double socket. Because it was one of the BFA expansions where like loot drops at the start were like just screwed up, like
Yeah.
just really weird. And yeah, we gave it to him because he's like, it's like it dropped for him. Typically, like if something drops you and you're gonna equip it, you just get it. That was the old way personal it worked.
Yeah.
He ended up selling it to Liquid for a gold cap and not telling us.
Oh man.
Um, Shout out Pretend. He's actually still in the guild. He's kind of he's an okay dude. But yeah, no, it's like now we don't have that story of how Pretend, screwed over us and was able to sell a BOE with double socket. So
um
but
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. One thing I want to touch on before we get into our own prog is actually the fact that Brewmaster was present on every boss kill by the top two guilds. So they had a Brewmaster on every one. And I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the talent builds that they played on Sarkareth, because there's an interesting difference between the two. And an interesting thing, like if you're looking at talent builds for this tier for your own play in Raid, kind of like looking at what they did and thinking about what that means for the overall talent build that you're looking at. So I've got pulled up now. This is this is Liquid's Brewmaster. I don't remember which of their tanks was playing Brewmaster, but one of them was playing Brewmaster. This is a fairly standard talent build. If you look at the Dragonfire Brew talent build that is posted on Peak, this is pretty much the same thing. The main difference is that instead of playing with high tolerance or with counter strikes, which are kind of the two variations that you'll see, commonly they play with Bountiful Brew, which is proccing Bone Dust Brew just as you go on. And it's a nice build in that it doesn't require too much thought. It's not playing Blackout combo. It's not playing Charred Passions. Technically, the highest DPS you can go for if you want to just like go really hard on DPS is to play both of those talents. But it's really rotationally intensive to do that. And this is a similar, like it's less DPS, but it's similar. That sacrifices the like higher cap for just a much easier rotation mechanically and being able to just kind of like send things on cooldown and not worry about it. The lack of high tolerance is interesting because traditionally we've seen kind of world first level tanks playing more defensive things, and high tolerance is still a pretty good defensive option, but it is expensive in terms of points. It costs 2 points. And so they skipped it basically in favor of Bountiful Brew and Chi Surge, which is the Weapons of Order cooldown reduction. They also are not playing either Light Brewing or Black Ox Brew, which is unusual. This is actually in some ways closer to like the Mythic Plus kind of low-key farming setup where you don't play either of those in lower keys because you can just like play Training of Niazao and Bob and Weave and do more damage.
Gotcha.
Now, one thing I do want to highlight is that on the class tree, they are playing Resonant Fist, but not Cat Statue. Skipped Cat Statue in order to pick up 2 points in Generous Pour, which is the kind of Brewmaster AoE or like Monk AoE buff that gives avoidance. Now, interesting thing, if we look, this is Mirai's talent build. Few differences. They skipped Chi Surge. They are playing 2 points in high tolerance instead. And on the class tree, other than that, on the spec tree, it's like more or less the same. On the class tree, they are playing. They've skipped Resonant Fists entirely, and are playing Bounce Back with Black Ox Statue. And generally, you don't pick Black Ox Statue unless you have a specific use for it, and I suspect the use is to pick up the Null Glimmers efficiently. I wasn't able to tell for the VOD, but I suspect that's the reason. And the fact that they are playing Bounce Back is basically only because pathing requires that you pick Bounce Back in order to reach Black Ox Statue. But not playing Resonant Fists is a pretty big DPS loss as well. So that's just like an interesting thing. They are also not playing both points um, in the healing buff aura. So it's only 4% increased healing instead of 8%. So there's some interesting things here, but an important point in both cases they are not playing blackout combo.
Yeah.
And in both cases they are not playing Charred Passions, and that is, I think, again, like a concession towards these fights are complicated and hard, and there's a lot for them to be managing without having to add Blackout Combo and Charred Passions to the mix. Neither of them are playing Cat Statue. Again, just another cooldown that you have to manage. You can kind of just send it on cooldown and be pretty fine, but they both opted for other things that gave more kind of raid-wide defensive value.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting. We weren't able to look at talent builds for monks really in the last race because there weren't any.
Weren't in it, yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, especially with like this tier, there's some like back and forth between like, do you play blackout combo? Do you skip it? Do you play Charred Passions, or do you play Dragonfire Brew? Seeing
Mm-hmm.
both of the world first tanks kind of hone in on this, like, we're gonna play Dragonfire Brew, we're not gonna take blackout combo. Um, it's actually funny, the liquid version of this talent build is pretty close to what I played as like my easy mode. Like, I'm playing this Brewmaster as my alt last tier. Like, I just jammed a bunch of talents, and I played Rushing Jade Wind because it's habit, and I've played it for 37 years at this point. It feels like.
Yeah. It's the button you always want to press. So.
Yeah. But other than that, it's like a bunch of passives and just like cooldown reduction, and Bone Dust Brew just like procs itself. So if you forget to push it, it's not the end of the world.
Still gonna get use out of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's funny. Yeah.
Yeah. It was cool. Also, fun note. Fun little thing about the talent trees: neither tank took interrupt on Sarkareth.
It's pretty funny. But that's what your DPS are for, right?
Yep, that's what the DPS are for.
Yeah. That's funny. No, yeah, it was an interesting, yeah, it was I'm trying to think, there was only, I mean, not much Mistweaver play. Echo ran a Mistweaver for the majority of their fights. Actually killed. They were in on the Razaketh kill, or sorry, Sakareth kill. Um, but yeah, no, it was yeah, not too much difference in what they were playing though, because I think they just played the standard talent build that yeah, they played like the new Yulan build basically.
Yeah.
Um, for that, so sort of mirroring exactly what we have sort of in Peak is sort of like the basic raid build. So no interesting variations, we'll say. Um, but cool. No, that's awesome. Yeah, it's fun to sort of get that sort of insight of seeing like what top players are doing, because I mean the consensus you always hear, I feel like at a lower level is like tanks just need to do more damage. Like that's all you end up taking, and so
Yeah. One of the things, so like, all right, so Kate's done a ton of work on Brewmaster Sims for this patch, and working on the APL and figuring out all this stuff. And it's basically boiled down to two builds, one of which is very similar to what both of these world first tanks were playing. The main difference being picking a bountiful brew instead of high tolerance, just dropping high tolerance. And that's kind of the more like, high tolerance is a nice passive defensive boost, and if you don't need the raid damage, it's pretty free. Both of them played slightly more offensive than I would have expected. And I don't know, it's just interesting. It's very cool. Like, I think this is a very interesting kind of byproduct of the change to talent trees. Like, this kind of variation is not something that we saw basically ever with talent builds in previous expansions. But here there are actually like kind of noteworthy differences in not only the talent builds that the two top brewmasters played, but also some differences to what like the Peak of Serenity builds are, where they ended up kind of in this midpoint between our like kind of easy mode build, just play this and you will be fine, and the like what Kate calls the cursed build, because you have so many plates to spin. You have to keep Rushing Jade Wind up, you have to keep Charred Passions up, you have to keep Blackout combo rolling, you have to Blackout combo every Breath of Fire, and ideally also Blackout combo every other Keg Smash, and like all this stuff. And you play it and you like are trying to Weapons of Order all of your cooldowns, and you stack it's just a mess. And if you play it well, it's really good, but it's such a mess.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, but yeah, no, it's the talent diversity has been fun to watch, I'll say. I mean, it's the first time in a while. I know that Mistweaver, like we've tracked more than one talent build, right? In terms of like
Yeah,
recommendations. So it's cool that it's in there. Yeah. Adds a little bit of expression, we'll say.
yeah.
And how you do it. So um well, cool. Well, that's on sort of the Race for World first stuff. So yeah, again, shout out to Liquid. NA brought it home back, trophies back in NA, which is awesome. But yeah, Echo was close. They were right there. So
Yeah.
um well, cool. I guess maybe we talk, yeah, a little bit backwards. I want to talk a little bit about our progression. Not for too long, just a couple minutes. But yeah, I guess you mentioned, I think you went in last night and you have Forgotten Experiments. Did you get any pulls on Forgotten Experiments last night, or
One whole pull.
one whole pull?
We
Nice.
just like YOLO pulled it at the end. We actually, so a little bit extra time on Sarkareth. We had some people's like alts in and stuff like that just to boost the chance that we get a third Omni token, which we
Yeah.
did, and that was nice.
Nice.
Um, but it was kind of like a little bit messy just from like 4 healing a 30-player raid or
Yeah.
5 healing a
That
30
fight
player raid. Yeah.
that
Um,
fight is not fun to heal. Yeah.
yeah. So
Or there's a lot of healing to go. Sorry.
there was that, and our phase 3 is still really messy, and it's such a like I don't want to spend too much time like working out how to fix up our phase 3 for heroic because it's so different on mythic.
Yeah. Yeah.
um so none of that translates, but we ended up spending like an hour on not Sarkareth itself, but just like uh we were done with it. It took like an hour and a half total to go through last two normal plus all of heroic. um
Gotcha.
and then spent way too long on
Yeah,
way
we've
too
been
long
getting a
on
little bit better. Ours is a lot easier now because it's literally just no one wants anything but from like the final two bosses, and everything else just goes to a healer. So
yeah.
it's basically we've cleaned that up. But yeah, yeah, we also sort of, yeah, our raid this week was actually really good. We got Forgotten Experiments down, and then we're able to get, I think we have like 20-ish pulls on Rashok.
Nice.
So we got, yeah, experiments down pretty early this week for the first go, which was nice. That was, I mean, healing any of these fights is not terrible, right? Like it's funny. I've not found a fight just yet that I hate. Although I will say that like Forgotten Experiments, the orb that you have to bounce in P3 or with the third ad, it comes in absolutely horrible. I hate it.
Yeah.
Like absolutely, it's like I literally, and this is so one of the first attempts, I ended up running, like trying to run into the orb, which you should never do. Because what I found is that sometimes it doesn't update that you've triggered it until you're already halfway through it, and then it just
It
bounces the
bounces in
orb
a random
closer to the boss.
direction. Yeah.
Well, no, it bounces it close to the
Oh.
boss typically,
Oh
because I'm like
no.
running out from the boss into the orb,
That's a
and so
good
like I'll
note
run
for
past the
us
orb.
tonight. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
don't. Basically, what we found for orbs is that just plant your feet in the line of it and don't move towards it. So like get
Yeah.
close, but then don't run into it because the pathing is weird with it.
So,
Um,
fun fact about Forgotten Experiments 2. Do you remember when they fixed on Halandris? Holy priests in spirit form could bounce the balls on Halandris?
yeah.
Yeah. So when they copied the mechanic for Forgotten Experiments, they didn't copy that bug fix.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You can be in spirit form and still bounce it?
Yeah. So I watched
Nice.
in a video. I was reviewing videos for this fight, and
Yeah.
they had a holy priest die soaking an orb, and it just kept bouncing into them over and over for 15 seconds while they were in spirit form.
That is awesome. That's really cool. We did not do that, but yeah.
I
And then
mean, I don't think you do
our
it intentionally, but it was a funny little interaction.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, then the other issue we ran into was honestly the deep breath in P3. Like the most hectic part of the entire fight is the when the second ad's at 50% health and the third ad comes down. Like that 50% health on the second ad as you kill it is the most hectic portion of it because you have
Yeah.
like a dispel in there, you are about to get a set of raid damage, and then you have the deep breaths. And so it's like a bunch of, oh, and the mass disintegrates too
Yeah.
are coming out. So it's a lot of like damage overlap because people can have bomb and mass disintegrate, and like if they die early, then a bomb goes off, and then like your dispel
Yeah.
strats are all messed up. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What we found was, I mean, honestly, what we found to be the most helpful is literally just always mass dispelling. Like we mass dispel the debuffs, right? But always mass dispelling at like a set time, regardless of like where other debuffs are.
Yeah.
Like how close, like basically, yeah, what we were doing previously was like waiting till a debuff went out and then dispelling. But if you do that too many times, you end up with like your previous people at like the 17 plus stack count,
Oh
which
yeah,
is very like people die.
very
Like just
dangerous. Yeah.
yeah, you'll die. Yeah. But no, it was a fun fight to progress. I think we took maybe like 30-ish bulls, I want to say, on it.
Yeah.
I can look it up as we're sort of talking here. But yeah, no, it was good. And then yeah, we started on Rashok progression, which honestly I think is going really well. We've had a lot of dumb deaths, we'll say, too. I lied. Forgotten Experience just took us 11 kills. So or 11 pulls, sorry. Um, but yeah, Rashok, we've had a lot of dumb deaths to waves, we'll
Yeah.
say. And like that's the killing factor right now. Like I think healing is sketchy but fine. But waves are killing people. And
Yeah.
actually clears are killing people.
Really.
And
Okay.
it's because our people are just not clearing when they should.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
like so we had one attempt where somebody called, like we do it in 3 groups. So somebody called group 1, or not somebody, but our raid leader called group 1, and I guess he saw a little bit of damage go out, and then he called group 2, but group 1 was still clearing as group 2 is running in,
Oh
and then we all
no.
die. And then like I love his immediate response was like, "Do we have an extra healing cooldown there? Did someone miss a healing cooldown?" And I'm like, "No." I'm like, groups 1 and 2 basically cleared at the same time. He's like, "No, I called them early." I'm like, "Okay, well, like let's check the logs." And like you look at the debuff timing, and it's like in that poll, group 1 and 2 literally are the exact same bar. Like the
Yeah.
bars they have the debuff. I'm
Yeah.
like you can't clear 2 whole groups and live. So
Yeah.
but yeah, we just got to clean up that and like clean up standing in fire, and I think we kill it. So we've gotten it to, I guess, 33%, which um is okay.
Yeah.
That's sort of hitting the second intermission. And yeah, it's just the final part's gonna be interesting because you can't clear debuffs anymore. So the damage really ramps up at the
Yeah.
end. So it's sort of keeping it
Damage
scary.
ramps up
But
not only on that, but I was looking at how much damage you take from Searing Slam, and the last one, the ninth Searing Slam, is 550k damage,
yeah.
which,
Yeah.
like, basically everybody that is going to be around 95% of your health,
Mm-hmm.
which just means that without, damage reduction or like rallying cry kind of cooldowns, the last one shots the raid.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super, super sketchy. So um yeah, we haven't gotten there just yet, but hopefully that isn't an issue. So
Yeah.
but yeah, we'll go back in there. It's funny. We've done our one extra mythic day for most raids. So Monday will be our extra mythic day, our only extra mythic. Like we do one extra day a tier basically. And so we basically had the choice last week of doing last Monday, um, and going in and getting extra time on experiments, or waiting till vaults and stuff
Yeah.
and another re-clear. And we ended up waiting. So yeah, it was a good raid week.
Nice. So yeah, we went in and our reclear, like Heroic Sarkareth was a little bit messy.
Hmm.
Mythic reclear was incredibly smooth.
Oh, nice.
One shot Kazara, which was actually a pretty big pain point last week. We 2-shot Zakali, and the only reason it wasn't a 1-shot is one of the ads slipped through again. Just like an ad
Oh
slipped through
no.
and just hit the door, and that's an immediate raid wipe. It instantly kills like
Oh
half the raid.
yeah.
And then the second time it was like fine. We just like killed the boss. And
I
our
do have one
oh
real quick. Just one Zakali tech thing
okay,
is, so we got the molten ad thing spawn as we pushed him
right,
over. They cancel their channel
yes,
and they run to the raid. So I don't know if the people didn't know that, but yeah, like we were very concerned. Like we were just like, just run to the boss. Will he somehow heal through the AOE damage, and like
yeah.
everything will
And then
be
the
okay.
ad
But
just
we
follows
found,
you over. Yeah,
yeah, I'll just follow. Just like immediately canceled their channel, right, like ran over. So
yeah.
it was a little bit tough to deal with the debuffs, but I mean,
You
didn't have
know,
to deal with the channel.
all of the criticism that we leveled at Blizzard, as not just like us on this podcast, but
Right.
us as a community for all of the like push timer nonsense over the
Yeah.
past 2 expansions, this raid is incredibly good at making
Oh
sure
yeah.
there's no like really miserable push timers or anything like that. Like Forgotten Experiments, all the timers run in the background. You can't
Yep.
change what overlaps there are. The only thing you can do is like you can stop damage to skip like push right after a mechanic would have happened.
Hmm.
But that's like the only thing you can do, and there's like kind of a breakpoint in raid DPS where it stops making sense to even push slower. Instead,
Yep.
you just push faster, and you, instead of pushing like after the second, you know, debuff goes out, you push right after the first debuff would go out. And so it
Yeah.
actually interacts really nice with just overall raid DPS going up. And then stuff like Assault of the Zikali, if you push while a Mystic is out, they just follow you over. And it's just in general like really nicely done. Like the only
Yeah.
thing that really feels, I think, bad with awkward push timers is if you push on Sarkareth from phase 1 to phase 2 while you have Dread out or a tank debuff out or a bomb out. Those people, like the Dread has to get dispelled and you have to do that, or a tank bomb or a DPS bomb has to go downstairs
Hmm.
and kind of
Yeah.
like the mythic strat that Liquid was using was actually to send everybody downstairs for it. Um, but for heroic, it kind of just feels bad. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like then we did what people are calling the Honolulu strat, because Honolulu was the first guild that we know of to do this.
Yeah.
Where you don't swap, like you don't, nobody swaps sides in phase 1.
Yep.
You just swap the bosses.
Yeah. I love this strat.
It's such a good strat. We technically have 2 pulls on Amalgamation Chamber because we YOLO'd 1 pull at the end of raid last week. And we just one shot it on
Yeah.
Friday this week.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and our kill was not clean, but our phase 1 was very clean.
Yeah.
We ended up losing like 5 people a minute and a half into phase 2 because they were stacked when Shadow of Flame happens and just immediately cleared on each other. And it turns out that clearing 4 times, like taking the damage from clearing 4 times, just immediately one shots you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how we lost people this week too. Our clear amalgamation not clean, but we got it done after a pull or two. So that's
um,
awesome.
so what we're looking at tonight is we're going into Forgotten Experiments. From what we've seen, a lot of guilds take around what you guys did, around like 10-15 pulls. And
Yeah.
so that's going to be like an hour to 1 to 2 hours of raid time, which means that we got to be prepared to spend a couple hours on Rashok and not have
Yeah.
that be a waste of time.
Yeah.
Um,
Rashok is the progression has been fun. I'll say the only issue that we saw was there is some weird like when the new mythic mechanic is there's like a puddle that goes down that you have to use the charge jump slam thing to clear one of two. They're two spawn at a time. And when they expire or they explode, they put a absorb shield on the raid.
yep.
And so the idea is you basically need to clear one so you don't get a double absorb shield and eventually just die basically
Yeah.
with the jump slam. And what we found is that we can bait them off fairly well, except right before the second, or right around the second intermission, that I guess it's like the fourth jump that he does I remember correctly. Um, we found sometimes they don't spawn near each other. We had
Yeah.
one spawn literally by the door, and the second one spawn back where he spawns. And like then it's like, well, where do you run to? And like, yeah, it's sort of you get a little confused because that one that's super close to it, we never drop a puddle there.
Yeah.
And like we always go to a further one, and it confuses a little bit. But other than that, I mean, Rashok, it's funny. The intermission damage as a healer is a lot less, and the actual scary parts
Is the
are
charge smash.
it's the charge smash. It's the absorb shield plus charge smash combo into debuff clears.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
that combo
I was
of
looking at
actually
that for healing CDs, and that
yeah,
combo is around 30 million damage to the raid. It's like 27 to 30 million
yeah.
damage to the raid. For like context on what that number means, right? The raid as a whole has around 10 million health combined.
Mhm.
Um, right around there right now. People DPS have around 500 to 600,000 health. So 30 million damage to the raid is everyone's health bar 3 times
Yeah.
over like a 20-second period. It's
Yeah.
a
It's
lot
a
of
it's
damage.
it's a ton of damage, yeah. So I mean that's the dangerous part. The intermission, I mean, don't get me wrong, the intermission is still a lot of healing. You can't forget about it, but like you can't commit healing CDs to it. So you gotta
Yeah. I
sort
actually
of put
am,
through it.
after this podcast, going to be going and doing healing CDs for Rashok. And
Nice.
yeah, the basically what I was looking at is it looks like the first searing slams you just kind of, this fight is really nice. There's no background damage. So if a
Yeah.
Searing Slam happens and there's just a ton of time after it, like which happens on 2 of the 3 every phase, there's just nothing after it for like 15 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of like just let regular old healing top people
Natural
back
healing,
up.
yeah.
On the later ones, you kind of have to put. It looks like to me you kind of have to put healing CDs there because it does so much damage that natural like regular old healing is not going to top people time.
Right, yeah.
But on the early
Yeah.
ones where it's only doing like 150k damage, you just like let regular, rejuvenation and efflorescence and renewing mist and all that stuff just like
Yeah, slowly, yeah, trickle them up, yeah. Yeah. But no, Rashok's been fun. I mean, goal is to get it down for us tomorrow and then set us up for a good third week, we'll say, of progression. So
Have you looked at
um
Skarn at all?
no, that's what I'm doing later today. Yeah.
The
Yeah. I'm not looking forward to that.
I've spent very little time looking at it because it's still a couple bosses away for us. But one thing that has been on my mind is I've heard a lot about people 3 tanking this fight, and
Yeah.
your third tank only does bombs basically. So
Interesting.
that's going to be
I
something.
want that. I want that
I'll
job.
probably be looking at that. We'll probably be talking about that next week because I expect both of us will
Mm.
be working on Skarn next
Yeah.
week, if not. Well, so the stuff I've seen so far, Rashok is around a day of rate progression, like a 4 hour block of rate progression, 4 to 5 hours, and
Yeah.
then Skarn is like 5 to 6. Um,
Yeah.
so like we may not be killing Skarn next week, but we might be. It's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. So, but yeah, that's progression. So I mean, I didn't really mention it, but we had a super clean normal and heroic. I hopefully we drop normal this week coming up. We'll see.
Yeah,
So I think we've got everybody 4 piece, but one of our healing paladins. So they'll just get priorities for heroic that and see.
I have one piece of tier. It is the guaranteed Omni token, the achievement,
Oh no.
and
Yeah,
we've been like super screwed on Zenith tokens just in general.
oh
So the Zenith
gotcha.
people that we have that have 4 piece got it basically by us giving them multiple Omni tokens from Sarkareth.
Yeah, nice. Yeah,
Which
we've been. Oh, sorry.
that's a really nice thing about the Omni tokens is it lets us kind of make up for that RNG versus last year we had like Venerated that got nothing while we were literally giving Warlocks dreadful tokens to roll for tertiaries.
Yeah. I feel like the warlock tier there always drops like candy. Whatever token a warlock's on, like that's the token you want to be on. So yeah, I mean we basically like we've gotten really lucky with our spread. We also 30 man Sakareth on both normal and heroic
Yeah.
for the 3 tokens. So we'll pull in like alts or like people's friends, just be like, hey, you're gonna trade the gear, but you can come for a kill, right? And
Yeah.
get,
And
AOTC or whatever. So
we did that. We did I think 28 people this week on
gotcha.
normal and heroic Sarkareth, and we just happened to like that. There's a 20% chance you don't get that third token, but we high
Yeah.
rolled in both cases, and we got 3 Omni
Oh,
tokens
nice.
on both kills. So we haven't done all of normal in main raid though, so we are missing like some like people who showed up to the off night. We're going to clear the first 7 in
Yeah.
normal kind of thing. Got some tokens there, but just because it's fewer people, there are fewer tokens because we're
Yeah.
not doing it in main raid. A lot of people don't get them. So we're I think missing 4 people's tier sets, including mine.
Gotcha.
But like, I'm actually at the point that I have taken off my old tier set just to put on eye level because I can put on a bunch of like 440 pieces over.
Yeah.
This was an alt last year, right? I don't have all mythic tier. I have a
Gotcha.
little bit of heroic tier, a little bit of mythic tier. So I ended up just like taking it off because I could get multiple slots, like 30 eye level gains, and that's
Nice.
like just enough that the old tier set's not that great. It's good, but it's not 30 eye levels good. And new tier set I just don't have yet. So I'm like lowest on the priority list for tier set, basically.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Looking at actually, we have 3 people that don't have it. I forgot. But one's 2 healers, and then one's a druid that's out for the next week and a half. So, um, passed it over her. So, but that's I mean, progression's going well. I'm excited. Like honestly, looking at the rest of the bosses that we have left, there's not one that I'm dreading or one that I think will be like not fun. And then I mean, the bosses we are killing, like even though most people give Assault, I think a bad name. Like I don't think it's it's an easy fight and you can control how fast it goes, right? Like that's the biggest thing is like
Yeah, I mean, I think
you're not
Assault's a
waiting
fun
like a
fight. The most frustrating part about Assault, there's two frustrating pieces. One, needing the Mortal Strike on the boss when he starts to heal.
yeah.
We ran into that last week, right? Where we
Mhm.
didn't have the Mortal Strike on the boss when it started to heal, and we just like threw away multiple pulls to that, and then we fixed it, and it was fine. And then the other one is the ads, the wall climbers, just like sneaking past, and just like any
Yeah.
of them getting through, just being an instant raid wipe, right? Um,
Yeah. We
that's pretty
basically
annoying.
we wiped to that twice during progression. I think on like yeah.
Yeah,
And so we basically assign someone each side. So one person each side, literally all they do is watch the corner. So that's
right.
technically where they're gonna come from. So
That's a
like
couple pro tips. If you're a brewmaster, Black Ox statue will pick them up. So it
oh
is
nice.
worth taking that, and whichever side you're on of your like platform, like you guard one corner and you put your Black Ox statue on the other corner, and then nothing gets through. And so that's
Yeah.
really good. The other thing is, if you're not a brewmaster, if you're just a DPS or a healer, wall climbers don't hit very hard. They hit like a world mob.
Yeah.
So you can actually, it's super safe for you to just like hit them, like throw a
Hmm.
moonfire, throw a starfire, whatever you can do, like spinning crane kick, whatever, to just hag them. And as soon as anything touches them, they will stop going towards the door and they will start, following threat and following people around. So it's actually super safe, even to pick up multiple of these ads and bring them to the tank. And those are both
Yeah.
good ways to avoid the wipes that we had.
Yeah. That's yeah, that's a really good tip. So but yeah, no, I think yeah, I'm super excited for the rest of Prague and yeah, even reprog, even like reclears aren't terrible. They're fun. So
Yeah, it's. I like this raid so far. I am worried. Skarn is the fight that worries me. That's the fight that worries me. Is like this could kind of be awful,
yeah.
but it also doesn't look like it's taking too long. So it's not going to be like an Anduin, 3 weeks of Anduin Prague. The fight's miserable kind of deal. It's going to
Yeah.
be like if it's a bad fight, it's a bad fight that we get through in 1 to 1.5 nights kind of deal.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Um well, cool. I think maybe jump off our progression for a bit and do this podcast in reverse and sort of start with the news, we'll say, or the stories from last week, since we spent, the first half talking a ton about yeah, race forward first and then just Prague in general. Um, so cool. Maybe a couple of sort of news stories or sort of things that came out last week. One is so if you weren't aware, it's been a while ago now, like 6 or 8 months. Microsoft announced that they were going to acquire Activision Blizzard, which I'm super excited for if this does go through. But there's a bunch of sort of potential pushback from just governments and regulators and things like that.
Right.
So, Blizzard and or Activision and Microsoft have been working through that together. Been some interesting things coming from Microsoft. So if you're not too familiar, like Microsoft committed to like making what is it like
Call of
every
Duty.
Call of Duty
Yeah.
available like for the Switch, not for PlayStation, but for like the Switch, like for the Nintendo systems, like moving forward and stuff like that. Just because PlayStation did some weird stuff to them too. So yeah, I mean, there's been a bunch of announcements around it, but we've now started to hear governments weigh in essentially. So governments have come back with their assessment, and so we didn't talk about this, but a couple weeks ago, the Britain or the UK denied or said they're not going to approve the merger, which was the first major government to come out and say they weren't going to approve it, and it's kind of a big deal. But then we got two good pieces of news. If you care about this, you want this to go through. The EU approved it, which is again, Britain is or UK is not a part of the EU. They're two separate things. But the EU, but the EU approved it, and then so did China. China also approved it, which is huge. And so yeah, so we saw basically two of the largest, with China being the largest economy or like yeah, game economies approving the merger, which is great. I don't think the US has had their official response yet.
Yeah.
But with the EU and China approving it, like there's going to be a ton of pressure.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I suspect that it's funny, a bit of Schadenfreude, but because of Brexit, Britain may not have a say.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Like they just
yeah,
aren't big enough to
they're
have
not
a
big enough.
say.
Yeah,
They gave away their collective bargaining power by leaving the EU.
yeah,
I just think that's really fucking funny.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. it was funny too because like I mean I have a couple of friends who work at Activision or work for them, right? And a couple other friends who play the stock market, and they were a little upset with the first piece of news because it meant that potentially the merger falls through. Um, Also meant that they started to gamble a little bit on puts. If you know what that is, on Activision, thinking their stock price would go down. But yeah, with the news for the EU and China both approving it, like at this point, that's a huge. It's a huge. It's now like less likely to occur
Yeah,
than when the first news of like the
yeah.
UK came out of them denying it. So,
I think
um,
the only thing that could really stop it now is the FTC coming in and saying no,
yeah,
this
yeah,
isn't happening.
yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, good news if you care about Microsoft, Blizzard, Activision Blizzard merger. I would love to see Activision's catalog on Game Pass for Microsoft, just because I have to subscribe to that thing anyway. So nice.
Here's a fun thought. Do you think that they would put World of Warcraft subscription as part of Game Pass?
Oh, so fun. When this news came out, I thought about that. I don't. If they do, it will be a couple of years from now. So like if the
Okay.
merger went in like next year, I'd say like 2 or 3 years beyond the merger, they might do something like that. It won't be a
Hmm.
very immediate thing. Um, I think the WoW subscription is enough to stand on its own, and I think they'd need a lot of time to like integrate like a lot of the companies together where it made sense from like a cost perspective
Right.
um
Fair
to
enough.
move to fold it all together. But yeah, I mean I think outside of that though, I think a lot of the Blizzard doesn't put out single player games anymore, but a lot of the Activision single player games could come to Game Pass and I'd be all for that. So cool. So then in other news, there was a Korean interview with Ion Hozzikostas and Holly. Oh, I always forget Holly's last name. Holly Longdale. And so they went over a couple of things. There's actually some very interesting things in this interview. So it's a very short interview. It's only about 20 minutes. Um, the commentator, of course, is speaking Korean, but they do sort of subtext all the questions. And then Ian and Holly's answers are in English. So don't worry about having to learn Korean to visit this. But they talked about a couple different things. I think the first up is that they Blizzard in general is happy with the way Dragonflight has come out. They're happy with the way like the community feedback's been great for them, and all that fun stuff. But they did talk a little bit about like the changing to a more frequent patch cycle,
Yeah.
right? And they're basically came out. This is the first time I've ever heard this. Is that they're shooting for a 6 to 10 week patch cadence, meaning every 6 to 10 weeks a new patch comes out, which
So
is crazy.
for reference, Legion actually was close to this. Legion had an 11-week patch cycle in
Yep.
general. We basically got every 11 weeks, which is, for those keeping track at home, about 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Just shy of 3 months. We had a new major or minor patch. And so if you look at Legion, everything 7.0 through 7.3.5, if you do math, that is around 2.5 years, which is
Mm-hmm.
what Legion was. And then BFA had like there was the dead period after 7.35, where they were working on BFA. So this is like even more frequent. Generally, I'm happy with it. We've talked about patch stuff almost nonstop since the release of the
Yeah.
expansion. And that kind of steady flow of stuff is good. One of the other things they talk about in this, kind of jumping around a little bit, is balancing more frequently. Some of
Mm-hmm.
that is the more frequent patches because they it seems like due to the bigger like talent tree changes as part of patches. Um, Probably due to just general like they need to update the client and get stuff localized, all of that stuff that goes into a patch that can't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily be hot fixed. But then also in between patches doing hot fixes, tuning classes, all this stuff that has been a lot more frequent. Like we have had in less than the span of a patch more changes to Brewmaster than it got for the entirety of Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's crazy. But Brewmaster feels really good right now. I played Blood DK in
Mm-hmm.
10.0 because it was really good in raid, and Blood DK is fun. It's really fun. It has its own problems, but it's fun. And I came back to Brewmaster for this patch, and it's just like a blast to play.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the more frequent patches allows them to do that. And I think it comes with, I think, like two sort of things. Like on the tuning side of it, they definitely can tune more. They also mentioned that like a lot of it is sometimes the tuning that they end up doing isn't numbers based, but it's perception based, which is I think we've talked a little bit about this. Like this was something that that Dota 2 or Dota was notorious for in that like in many cases they would make changes to heroes fairly frequently, but they make changes just to make changes. Like it's not
Yeah.
that the heroes were bad or that they thought they were overpowered or undertuned. It was more of just like from a community point of view, nobody played it, so let's make a change of just a random change to it, and maybe people will play it, and it'll be
Yeah.
something new, right?
League of Legends
Um,
did the same thing historically. Like
yeah,
that was actually at one point in one of the dev interviews they said, yeah, these like changes, the like 2% buffs to a champion, like it doesn't matter that the buff didn't actually meaningfully impact their like numbers.
yeah,
The fact of the matter is, in the patch notes, you see buffs to the champion, and it's a little bit less clear. Like I think WoW actually is worse about this because they'll give a class something that is literally like a 1% buff, and
yeah,
the patch note says increased, frost death knight damage by 1%, and everybody reads that, and it's obvious that it's just 1%, and it's not going to move. Which
yeah,
then you look at these other game patch notes and it's like increased potency of this spell or this, ability by 50. And it's like,
yeah,
oh my god, they got a buff.
yeah,
Never mind that it actually works out to a 1% increase on that spell or something like that. Um,
exactly.
and so like Brewmaster actually had a little bit of this in the patches that buffed Brewmaster. There was a bunch of doom and gloom about Brewmaster going into the expansion,
Hmm.
which was largely unfounded and just based on bugs. And
Yeah,
um, there are two changes that both individually are not huge. Like
hmm,
there was the reduction in cooldown of Celestial Brew, which mattered for like Diurna because it lets you Celestial Brew every tank hit, and that was like it.
gotcha.
It's like generally good, but it's not like game break. It's not massively buffing them. And then there's the Magic Stagger change, which honestly, like, there's a nice quality of life change,
Hmm.
but didn't really impact the peak of what you could do. It was more of like a quality of life change if you weren't mapping out your cooldowns. It made it easier to deal with magic damage. Um, and so like each individually didn't really move the cap. Both
Hmm.
kind of increased the floor, or like how much value you could get out of the spec. Um, but both look like really big buffs, right?
Right. Yeah.
And things that people have been asking for a while. And so that was like people went back and reevaluated Brewmaster, and now like Brewmaster is one of the top tanks and all this stuff. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it would be good if they continue with that, and maybe some of the changes they need to make are, you know, things that are just hard to evaluate for a regular player. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if a theory crafter can tell you, yeah, it's a 5% buff to this ability. If it looks like it's like if you as a regular player look at it and go, I can't tell how big this is, but it looks big.
Yeah. I think that's what they're going for. Yeah. I think the other thing too is they also like they mentioned about this class balance piece. Like in the past, they were worried about up like unsettling players. Meaning like frequent changes means like you change the way you play more often and or like change certain skills being good or bad. Um, but the inverse of that is also true where it's like if you go longer without changes, then the player base thinks changes are never coming. Meaning like
Right.
if you're only making class changes once every 6 months and your class misses one of those 6 months, then you're going a year potentially without class changes or like,
Right.
8 months,
And at that point,
which
you might as well reroll.
yeah, exactly. You might as well just play a different class. That's seeing changes. So no, huge fan of that. I mean, funny that they mentioned the whole like it's sometimes it's just a perception thing they make changes for. And then the other thing too, just about the faster patch schedule outside of tuning is that they've also what they also mentioned was that like when they used to do longer patch cycles, everything had to make it.
Yeah.
So like if any content that missed a patch window suffers the same problem as class tuning is like you're then waiting another 6 months and maybe the content's no longer relevant for that,
Yeah.
right? Now with the shorter patch cycles, they're able to like I don't think they really said this, but the idea is they can tent pole or they can anchor a patch on a certain feature, and then whatever else they can fit in, they will. But if something doesn't make it,
They
there's
bump it
another
to the
one in
next
three
patch.
months.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another one in 3 months, and it's not as big of a deal. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, no, it was very insightful in terms of that and how they're thinking about it, and yeah, I don't think the rest of it. I mean, the rest of it was sort of just a little bit about account wide progression and how they continue to look at that, right? And the idea that they want to push players more towards Like they think they do a very good job of catering to like PvP players, small group instance like PvE players, and then rating, right? Of course, like Mythic Plus rating, very solid. But the one gap I think they have are just the outdoor environment players, like the
Yeah.
players who don't do organized content, might do solo stuff, might do just like world quests out in the world stuff. So
I talked about this last week with the hardcore stuff. I really just
yeah.
think they need to take a long, hard look at what progression, like leveling, tuning is like, and be like,
Hmm.
okay, solo outdoor play is like solo outdoor play is probably not at max level.
Yeah.
And I think they keep trying to push this like solo outdoor play at max level. And I mean, that, like, again, I'm going to go back to the kind of player that I was before they kind of abandoned all outdoor play, period. Right?
Hmm.
Like, prior to Mists, pretty much, I just, like, was a solo player, solo content, leveled characters, had a great time.
Hmm.
Cataclysm hit, like, I did all of the zones on different characters, so I don't have Lore Master, unfortunately. But like then the new Cataclysm zones were not as didn't have as much replay value, so I started switching over to doing like arenas with friends and things like that, low twos, and like I have the brutal whatever it is achievement for like doing a bunch of games, winning a bunch of games, but none of the achievements for getting good rating, which tells you about how
Nice.
good we were. Um,
Nice.
and then with Mop, it just like there was just no gameplay really outside of max level. Like you
Yeah.
leveled once through every zone, and that was it. There was nothing else
Yeah.
there, and like that represents a pretty good time sink. So as far as like actual amount of time playing, that is a lot of time. Um, but even now, I can still go back, and I'm playing hardcore characters right now. I have a rogue up to level 15 on the hardcore server, the unofficial hardcore server.
Nice.
Um,
Nice.
that um, it is different and fun and replayable, and I think that they could learn a lot from that if they stop trying to make it max level content.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's in my mind it's always it's a give and take, right? Because you have the idea of like you need something for kind of both sets of players, right? You need something for your max level players to do that's outside of just Mythic Plus and rating, right? And then you also need something to your point from a leveling point of view. It sounds I mean, for me the leveling stuff like that almost is like an expansion type feature or
Yeah,
overhaul. And then like it sort of sits till the next expansion and maybe they change it, right? I think Blizzard, just the way that people play games nowadays, like the idea of like constantly providing the same level of updates you do at max versus like to your sort of
yeah.
leveling or like your below max level content. It's just I think it's a too
I
much of an
and I
undertaking.
don't think they necessarily need to do that, right? Like, couple things in Legion in patch 725, they did an overhaul of tuning of all of the low level content.
Hmm.
And that was a pretty big change, massive improvement to the leveling experience overall. Removed a lot of stuff where both players could one shot mobs pretty consistently, and mobs
Hmm.
shot players pretty consistently.
Yeah.
And so smoothed a lot of that out. That was on the whole a great change. They did more of that work in BFA. Um, One of the things that I think they will ultimately struggle with if they try and do this is just that zone design doesn't support the gameplay
Yeah.
loop as well as it did in vanilla, and I don't think that that was a part of the post Cataclysm kind of zone design um, until like BFA.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think that they need to do the same level and frequency of like patches for low level
Yeah.
content. Cataclysm leveling has not changed, and people have kind of made their own game, and they're getting official hardcore servers, and that's all really cool. Um,
Yeah.
but official hardcore servers didn't come out for over 6 years after
Hmm.
Classic, like the re-release of Classic, and people have been doing this more or less since day one of the re-release of Classic, and it's been a popular thing in private servers as well for a while. And so I don't think that they need to have as many updates as long as they get the core gameplay loop of the leveling process to a point that it is fun and that you can have fun kind of going through the process and
Yeah.
the experience on each of the different specs.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, just I don't know. I mean, yeah, that's probably just for me. Like
And that's
I
not
don't.
that's
Yeah,
not for
I don't.
everybody. There's a lot of
Yeah,
raiders that like the sixty
I just don't.
dollars on the leveling boost is the best thing they've ever added.
I will. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, because I don't think it's just when I for me personally when I go and play classic, I am playing a different game, and so I'm
Hmm.
playing it differently versus like on retail. I literally could care less about leveling. Like
Yeah,
you will never. I think at this point I shouldn't say never, but in my mind I will never care about leveling on retail. The only thing that I will care about is if I have to do it and it's annoying.
yeah. I mean, there's like I have definitely there's characters that I've leveled because I want them for raid, right? I leveled
Yeah.
my monk and my DK, and I did my monk kind of the slow way, just like experiencing the dragonflight content, right?
Hmm.
And my DK, I like did the fast way, and because I wanted it for raid, and that ended up being my main last tier, and so I needed to level it the fast way so I could have it ready.
Right.
Um, but then there's other stuff like I've leveled, a rogue and a mage and all this other stuff just in my free time, and um, it would be nice if the leveling content were tuned a bit differently, at least from my perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I could definitely. I mean, I could definitely see it. It's just, yeah, from my point of view, it's like that's what classic is for.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah.
So,
It's just like it would be cool to like have the ability to do that, and then at the end of it, you have a character you can play on retail. Because
that's
like
fair.
I don't want to do raids on classic. I'm sorry, they're bad. Like
No, I don't.
they're
Yeah,
not bad, but they're like
I,
I don't want to. Like I would rather do keys than do Ulduar, and that's
yeah,
just
and
the way it is.
I think my problem is like I did those fights when they were current. Like, so that's the biggest problem with classic rating. And I realized that when I tried to level and like I leveled in Wrath, got my hunter up, started doing like weekly stuff on my hunter for probably like 2 or 3 weeks to like get ready for rating. And I'm like, I literally did this like 12 years ago. Like I don't want to do Hodir dailies. I don't want to like like run through heroics
Yeah,
like Utgar Keep and everything like that. Like I don't want to do like Nax because I like number one opening Nax of Lead of Wrath was a joke of like it
yeah,
was like an extended 5 man like
yeah,
for most of it. So it's like the hardest thing was getting the immortal achievement for having like no one in your raid die like that week. And it was like, can like are two just people who can't tie their shoes, correctly? Can they not walk in anything for 2 hours as we clear this, right? Was like the most difficult part of it. So
um,
that and like yeah, so yeah, I don't know. But yeah, so that's sort of from the interview perspective. It's a quick interview. It's like 20 minutes long. There's a couple of good. I think we've hit really all the interesting tidbits, but take a listen if you want to hear Holly and Ian talk. Holly again, super happy she's on the team. She's a really good perspective, I think. And like I feel like the roadmap is like her like child of like that's what she put together for this team. Was like we need a roadmap and like has been pushed for that. Um, so cool. So not too much more time left. I think there's only two other topics I really wanted to hit. I know we had a couple extra ones on the list, but I think first up is again, as Blizzard's been doing, they've done a massive tuning pass on Mythic Plus this week, adjusting something in pretty much every dungeon, both boss wise and trash wise. Um, a couple of notable ones just to sort of to get these out there is Treemouth and Brackenhide got changed. There's been a visibility thing, but then also the cooldown, I think, on the Grasping Vines and Consume was increased, which basically means you probably only get like, I don't know, key level wise, but if you're doing like your 16, 17s range, you should probably only get one of those in the
yeah.
fight, maybe a second one right at the end.
There's
So
also
that's,
the cooldown change means that now it is permanently desynced from Vine Whip. So one of the
yeah.
things that could happen before that we talked about last week, actually, I think, is you can get
Mhm.
Vine Whip while a tank is consumed, which makes it very difficult to control facing of that mechanic because the tank is consumed and can't move. And
Right.
so if you had it set at a bad angle and didn't realize it, and then Vine Whip happens,
Yeah.
die.
Yeah. It's rough. So yeah, so there some big changes there. And then, yeah, there's been just general changes across the board for like mostly damage reductions or like um time increases.
Yeah.
Like Dragul and Natharian's Lair, the final boss, got a couple of changes to the timings of like his abilities. Like the flames from the craters that form only damage every 5 seconds instead of 3 now. So it's been increased again, which
Yeah.
is makes that boss not too bad. So,
The one
sorry.
thing that really has stood out to me this week in terms of trash is the Sure Strike attack that some of the mobs have in Vortex Pinnacle. So what this is an instant cast. There's no cast time. Hit on the tank. It does a bunch of physical damage. By a bunch, I mean 400k on like an 18. Um,
Jesus, yeah,
and post mitigation on my DK, right? And every pack where these mobs appear, there's two of them, and they can sync up, so you can just like randomly get nuked for 1,000,000 damage out of nowhere. And outside of having a timer on the mob's nameplate to keep track of it, there's really very little you can do to deal with it. So I feel like that one needs like Blazing Slash in Eltharis is like similar. It's fire damage, but there's a 1 second cast time, so you can kind of see it going. And so like if you're playing anything really, you can hit a
hmm
defensive in that 1 second window, and it's a pretty tight reaction time, but you can react to it versus like, or be proactive with it and like, okay, the cast is starting when I hit Vampiric Blood. I'm gonna hit Dampen Harm, hit Diffuse
right,
Magic in the Blazing Slash case because it's fire damage and you can use it. Um,
right,
the ones in Vortex Pinnacle you can't. So like the 2 packs that those are in, Brewmaster has it pretty easy because not only is it dodgeable, it's physical damage, and so it staggers very well.
stagger, yeah,
You can't literally just stagger it because there's a bunch of other damage going out too, and if it lines up badly, taking 800,000 damage, even if you stagger, 70% of it, you're still taking like 250k damage to the face from physical damage in an instant. And
yeah.
if it happens to line up with other damage, it can just kill you. So you have to be careful about it. But like, I ended up just like rotating cooldowns to keep a cooldown up basically 100% of the time on those trash pulls to try and not die to Sure Strike. And like that's maybe overkill
That's
on Brewmaster, but for Blood DK, you absolutely have to. Vengeance, you just die. You just die.
you just get killed. That's hilarious.
Prot Warrior, you're probably fine because of like shield block and everything. And Guardian
Yeah,
Druid, I don't have enough familiarity with Guardian Druid, but I think if you can like maintain max stacks of Iron Fur, you're probably fine. But then like Blood
gotcha.
Decay and Vengeance are just like in the ground.
Just get hope it doesn't sync up. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, no, it's yeah. I think in general, yeah, tons of nerfs across the board, which I think are always a good thing. I mean, I will tell you, this week was like just easier in general from last week in keys across the board for me. And I don't know if that's just keys are easier, people know what to do, or the fact that I gained 10 item level,
I think it's a little bit of
which
both.
probably all of those together. But yeah, no, it's been a massive jump in item level, and yeah, they
I,
weren't they weren't
I
too
think
bad
we're
this
at
week.
the
So
point now where basically every key we can just press W, pull 1 pack at a time, play it safe, and time the key as long as we just don't wipe. Just don't
yeah,
wipe, you play it safe, and you can get your 20 portal and be done with the instance. And, you know, week 2 is maybe a little bit soon for that to be the case on a 20,
yeah,
but it is pretty chill. So
yeah. It's not too bad.
also, after two
Um,
weeks, I have to say, not having a seasonal affix is great. Thundering was a pain in the rear, and not literally just not having thundering in these dungeons is really nice. There's enough other.
yeah.
They were 100% correct to not put another seasonal affix in with the new slate of dungeons because there's just enough other stuff to learn.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's a really good change. The way the new affixes come in at what key levels, I think is a great change too.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, really hats off to Blizzard all around. Mythic Pluses. It's actually fun this season. So, well, cool. And then maybe the final thing we touch on, which is just maybe a quick little intro, is that Blizzard did put out a blue post just in terms of like talking a little bit about the fragment and crest system in upcoming basically. And so one of the concerns that people have come out with, which really isn't my concern, but people have talked about it, and so I want to talk about this, is that they're thinking about moving all the crests and fragments to a currency tab for a future season. So it won't happen this season, of course. But the idea is, potentially moving all of that stuff in your inventory into a currency tab and going from there. Will be interesting if they do that. But then the second point, which is actually the more important point of what they said, is they are also discussing how to help players who have capped on a given tier of crest and what to do from there. So, like for example, if you cap on aspect crests, technically doing more content that drops aspect crests is pointless for you to do because you will we will gain nothing from that other
It's
than
kind of not
the potential
because
gear.
gear, right? The end of dungeon drops.
Well, yeah, but if you're so, and this is where the issue I think actually comes in is when you talk about lower crests.
Yeah,
So when you talk about like outside of aspects, which are the top level ones, but like worms and I don't think dragon scales are the ones below
Drake,
worms?
Drake.
Drake, sorry. Um, less about Drake, but I think worm is the worst offender of this, is that like I am having to do 11 to 15s to get worm crests to
Yeah,
upgrade gear through like the middle section. And it's
yeah,
just in my mind, that's like I don't care about the gear at this point. Like technically, if I get an item from one of these things, it's an upgrade. I'll use it and I'll upgrade it, right? But the idea is like the only reason I'm in there is because I need worm crests to upgrade my either normal or heroic tier sets, right? And it's just
yeah.
it is honestly awful. Like I understand why the system is. I think the upgrade system as a whole is amazing. I think it's much better than what we had. It's like not as confusing as I thought it was going to be once you get into it.
Yeah.
It's actually super straightforward, which is like
It's
surprising. Like
it's one of those things where if you read about it, you look at tables, you look at statistics, you look at
yeah,
all these numbers, it's like it's hard to understand it all from like a spreadsheet. But then
yeah,
you play with it, and it honestly, like, and I said this before, and like it's really just fine. Like it's very clear. Like you have your heroic tier stuff, which is your worm stuff. You have your mythic tier stuff, which is your aspect stuff, and your
yeah,
normal stuff, that's your Drake stuff. And you just like can upgrade things to the entry level of the next tier. It's like
yeah.
it's very straightforward to play with. But yeah, it definitely, like, I did a bunch of 11s to 15s this week to I've done a ton of keys. Do not.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I have done
You should check your Slack
so
sheet.
many Neltharis and Underrots trying to get these stupid weapons. And I'll one of the nice things about the upgrade system, so stuff that drops from a 17 caps at 441, stuff that drops from an 11 caps at 437,
7. Yeah.
which is like it costs a lot to get there, right? You're paying more Wormcrest to get there. But
hmm
I'll take it at this point. Give me a 437 Forge Storm.
Yeah. That is the one I'll say interesting thing that funnily enough, like I don't think our raiders realized it because like somebody was like, "Can I really upgrade this normal ring to 437?" They're like, "That's only like 3 item level or 4 item level off mythic," and we're like, "Yeah, yeah, that's how the system works."
How it
So,
works.
um,
I think
yeah,
there's a little bit of a point, kind of tying back to the Race to World First stuff, and our own progression stuff. I level of like last year, I like we talked about on this podcast how smooth the item level progression was. Like every boss, we were going up by 2 or 3 eye levels, and it was just this very smooth progression curve over the course of the tier. And like love it or hate it, that's how it worked. This tier, it's all front loaded.
yeah,
Last week we were 425. This week we're 435. Next week we're 441, and then we really don't go very much up from there.
yeah, yeah. Then it's sort of minor upgrades from there. But yeah, no, I would say like if they can fix the idea of like having to go back and farm lower, we'll say like lower difficulty content just for upgrade materials, we'll say,
Yeah,
um, I, then this becomes probably one of the better systems they've created in my mind,
yeah.
right? Like,
My one like kind of hang up over that is that right now the way it works gets higher level players into lower level keys to basically help carry those keys in the way that people would farm twos for Valor, and that would
yeah,
help people get into twos. Because otherwise there's very little reason to join a pug +2, right, or a pug +11.
yeah,
Um, and having like a eye level 440 hunter or mage or something join your +11 and help make up for the fact that it's your first time doing it and you don't know what the hell is going on, um helps make that like a smoother experience. I don't know if I would say a better experience, right? Because you run into things where a high level player can dominate things so hard that you don't get to play the game,
yeah,
or that they can be
yeah.
an
No, yeah.
asshole about it.
I mean, that's like I have a friend who like is just coming back to the game, and so like we took him into some mythic some +2s yesterday, and like one of my buddies is playing a rogue doing 150,000 DPS on like the first boss, and there is not another player over 30k DPS like in the
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
And so like it's one of those things where like he just deleted things from like a mechanics perspective, and you know the other like really the four of us are sort of along for the ride. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean I get that, but then there's also like from my point of view, like there's also like in my mind I'm also thinking like, well, maybe like I don't want to do a 19, like I just want to have a chill night,
Yeah.
do a 12, but I still get my crests, right? I still get the crests I need. I could get them from the 19 because if they implement this, like the 12
Then it
aspects at
falls
the end
back.
turn into
Right.
falls back, or I can be like, I just want to chill, I'll do a 13 and have like a similar thing.
And that's a great
So
point, actually. Even if they do this fallback thing, it doesn't mean that you never go into the lower level content.
yeah,
It just means that
exactly.
you can do the higher level one. And it actually would still be faster in a lot of cases to, instead of spamming 17s for the fallback,
Mhm.
second tier crests, instead, it would be faster to farm 11s. So if you wanted
Yeah.
to be fast, you could do that. Or if you wanted to play with friends, you could do that and get those crests that you do need.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and so you know what? That's a pretty good point. So I
Yeah,
think maybe I'm like overthinking the value of like pushing top end players into lower level keys.
yeah, yeah. No, it's and yeah. So I mean, we'll see how it plays out. This is again all speculative. Like Blizzard didn't agree or like say this was happening, but it's the ideas that they were thinking about, and it's ideas where they said like I think two things you can pull from this. Number one, this upgrade system is here to stay at least through next season, and then number two, they're at least thinking about ways to make it better,
Yeah.
which or make tweaks to it. So which is cool.
I think the fragments and crests being in your bags is probably the biggest pain point for me. I
Hmm.
normally don't have bag issues. Right now, I'm having bag issues because of how we're doing loot in heroic, where we're just not giving any. We're just speeding through the whole thing, not
Okay.
stopping for loot. Stop for loot at the end, and as a result, every boss is dropping, 5, 6
Yeah.
items, and that means all that loot's going to me over the course of 2 normal bosses and 9 heroic bosses. That's
Ton of loot.
66 pieces of loot, each of which does not stack.
Nice. Nice.
So, and I don't know if you've looked at how much bag space people have now with max tier bags. You have 5 of them, 150 slots.
Yeah.
And it works out to like 168 or something like that. But that's over a third of my bags that just have to be free before raid for that.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And so that's been my like the fact that all the crests and fragments have taken up space is like kind of an annoyance for that. But
Oh jeez. Oh man. But yeah, no, it's I mean, I'm excited to see what they change here. And if they can fix that whole having to downgrade to do lower level content just to get items to then upgrade to higher level, like
yeah,
it'd be a good fix to the system, I think.
yeah,
So
I
um
agree. I agree. Um, One final note on that: if you haven't done lower level keys, but you have been doing heroic raid, starting as of like next week, you no longer have to care because you can just
yeah,
keep doing heroic raid. Each one gives around 90 crests, and by the time you hit like 400 500 crests total, so if you've done
yeah,
a few 10 to 15 keys or 11 to 15 keys, you just stop crests
yeah.
because you've already upgraded items past that point.
Yep. You're good to go. So yeah. Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, cool. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this week. We're a little over, but I think we had
Yeah.
actually a lot more interesting things we got to talk about than I thought starting this one up. So
I have one final question before we end this. Quick
okay.
question. Okay. Did you get an evoker legendary this week?
No, we did not.
We didn't.
Although
We didn't either.
our evoker spent 1.3 million gold having like everything ready to get it.
And they didn't get
So
it.
and then didn't get it. But I mean, he's ready whenever it drops. So he'll
Yeah.
be. I mean,
Yeah.
we have two evokers on roster. One's a trial, so like it's gonna go to the core guy, at least the first one. So
Yeah.
but yeah.
Isn't it like it's personal loot and I don't think it's tradable.
Oh, is it? I thought it was no, because they were talking about on at least Liquid stream who to trade it to.
Okay, maybe it is tradable. I don't know.
Yeah,
But yeah, and it may have just functioned differently on Mythic for the first drop. I don't know, but what I've been
yeah.
hearing is that it's now personal loot
Oh,
for
is
lower
it? Oh,
difficulties.
that's sucks.
So, I don't know.
Oh,
We'll find out. But yeah, we didn't get one
yeah.
either, and neither did the other team in my guild. None of us have gotten it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice.
I think that is going to bring us to the end of the podcast today. Thank you all for watching and or listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support it and the other work that we do over on the Peak of Serenity, you can do that at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come and join the Discord. It is the best place for you to come and talk shop about Brewmaster talent builds and look at what the like top tanks are playing and like figure out why. We
Mhm.
can guess. We can't say for sure because we're not them mostly.
Well, yeah, some
Uh,
of us are.
we try to avoid pinging them. Uh,
Yes.
but we can talk about it a lot and talk through the pros and cons of different talent choices. And if all that sounds exciting to you, you should come and join the Discord and join the Brewmaster channels, or the Mistweaver ones, or the Windwalker ones, whatever spec you're playing.
Nice.
But that is going to be it for the show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.